When we look at what happened during the conclave, it's really interesting to see, or at least as you might recall there at the funeral and everything, all the heads of state together. And as you might expect, some things do in fact happen in parallel, right? You run into Trump, you run into Zelensky.
Take a big group photo.
Exactly. It also seems like this is the occasion for other things that are happening in parallel around the world. Now you see Pope Leo as someone who can help mediate conflicts, right? In Ukraine, in Israel as well.
I think Pope Leo XIV, he's going to help Trump reorganize this world order. I think he's going to work together, often many times without it seeming like they're working together, but he's going to help implement Trump's vision for what he thinks the world should be. And we can't forget that this is the week when Trump is going to the Middle East to make extremely important deals, and there's a lot of tension because many people are concerned about his physical safety. And if something happens to him, it's going to cause a huge uproar, right?
And Zelensky also invited Putin to meet on Thursday, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, in Turkey, exactly while Trump is traveling, right? So there's a lot happening this week that could take a terrible turn, you know? We already have a feud between Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, which is strange. Trump is making decisions there to strike a deal with Saudi Arabia without bringing Israel into the picture, saying he could close a deal with Saudi Arabia without Saudi Arabia having to normalize relations with Israel, basically taking Israel out of the equation. Then comes the chess game theory. Some people think this is a strategy by Trump to distance himself from Israel to see if it makes it easier to close the deal between the United States and Saudi Arabia, right? For example, let me put it in a joking way here. Saudi Arabia says, "Oh, I'm not going to make a deal with you. Are you friends with Israel?" He says, "No, I'm criticizing Netanyahu. I'm not friends with them anymore." No. "Oh, okay, so let's make the deal." And then they close it, you see? It could be a...
But Netanyahu was in the United States not long ago, and he seemed pretty calm there.
He did seem calm, but now, what's going on? Trump says that, he implied that Israel is using its intelligence service to try to pressure Trump into supporting Israel in an attack against Iranian nuclear plants. And Trump doesn't want to get involved. That's what's being said. And we know that the Israeli intelligence service really does have a lot of power. They have influence. A good part of recent history has been influenced by them, right? There are things that are way too controversial. I'm not going to get into that here, but I'll give you an example. You see interviews from the 90s, and even in the book that Netanyahu wrote about terrorism, remember Netanyahu is a veteran of the Israeli army. He says, look, United States, if you don't launch an offensive against Iran, against the Middle East, soon your national monuments could become targets of terrorist attacks, right? So he said this several times, insinuating that the Statue of Liberty, you know, some of those American cultural landmarks could be targeted in an attack. Then comes September 11th and you have something like that happen, right? There are people who say like, did Netanyahu have an insight or is there something more to it? So it starts, we get worried about that, right? Then comes the PayPal Mafia, right? I don't see anyone in Brazil talking about this. Yeah, maybe there are people talking about it and I just don't know, so I apologize, but it should be talked about more. What is the PayPal Mafia? Fortune magazine a few years ago created an published an article called The PayPal Mafia. What is the PayPal Mafia? They're the first guys who created PayPal. We're talking about Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, right? Reid Hoffman, David Sachs. We can take Reid Hoffman out of this equation because Reid Hoffman is a Democrat. He hates Trump. Now, the rest of the PayPal Mafia, Elon Musk, David Sachs, and Peter Thiel, are really close to Trump. These guys, especially Peter Thiel, not to mention that 3 of them are South African, right? And 1 is German. Peter Thiel is German, raised in South Africa. Musk is South African, and so is David Sachs. David Sachs, all 3 of them are billionaires, obviously. These guys came up with the whole fintech idea, right? They invented this, digital payments.
That's true.
But these guys, especially Peter Thiel, have always been connected to the CIA. Because when Peter Thiel created PayPal, the CIA already had, since the 1990s, a protocol for creating digital currencies and a digital payments market to monitor everything being transacted so they could spy on everything. So there was already this interest in using the concept of digital currency and a digital market so that you could have...
And by default, the American tax authorities themselves are already the first barrier, so to speak, right?
Exactly. It's right in your face. And then what happens? Peter Thiel's story needs to be studied very carefully because Peter Thiel was a guy who studied law at Yale. He was a lawyer in New York. And then suddenly this guy is working at a fintech, PayPal. And then soon after, he's creating a company called Palantir Technologies, which was the first company to come up with the idea of using artificial intelligence in warfare. You get it? In other words, all the drones being used in Ukraine and Israel use Palantir technology. Palantir Technologies was created with 70% of its capital from Peter Thiel and 30% from In-Q-Tel, which is the CIA's business incubator, man. So things start to get really crazy because the same guy who created the systems that were putting Trump supporters in jail on January 6th is also one of Trump's biggest backers. And then you say, man, Trump, I don't get what you're doing. The guy who gave the Biden administration the technology to arrest your supporters is the same guy backing you. And more than that, the guy who picked your vice president, Vance, Vance is basically Peter Thiel's protege. Peter Thiel came in and said, look, I'll support you, but I need to pick the vice president. Look at the power this guy has. Vance was a kid from the interior of the United States, whose mother was an alcoholic raised by his grandmother and all that. From this so-called sad story of his, he wrote a book called Hillbilly Elegy. This book became a bestseller and later was turned into a Hollywood movie starring Glenn Close and Amy Adams with a top-tier cast. And this guy, while studying law at Yale, was recruited by Peter Thiel. Because just like the World Economic Forum has this thing called Young Global Leaders, right? Which is Young Global Leaders, where they bring people in, train them, and send them out into the world. That's why Klaus Schwab says, I have my representatives in every government in the world. And he really does, because all these people are young global leaders. I'll give you an example. Tulsi Gabbard, who is currently the Director of National Intelligence, she's a young global leader. Here's another example. Javier Milei in Argentina, young global leader. So, Emmanuel Macron, young global leader. So Ian Bremmer from the Eurasia Group, the political analysis group, he says, oh, the World Economic Forum has no power. It's just a little group with assets of $600 million. It has no power, trying to play dumb, right? You say they have no power, man, but I think everyone in power today has gone through their training. So
is there anyone in Brazil? Nicolas Ferreira?
I don't know. I don't know about Nicholas. There are many, okay? I'm not going to get into that because the guy will say, hey, you're exposing me. But come on, it's really easy. There's a huge list of Brazilian young global leaders, several of them. So, yeah. Peter Thiel, I think inspired by this young global leaders idea, created a project called Founders Fund. One of the guys, he pulls the guy out of college and sponsors him to become a leader. One of them is Vitalik from Ethereum. He was the one who sponsored him. Why? Because he's the father of fintechs, of the digital currency concept. So he took this guy and sponsored him. So Ethereum is a company that comes from Peter Thiel, Palantir, and company. Yeah, so what happens? He took JD, Vance through the Founders Fund, took JD, Vance to Mithril Capital, which was his investment company, and he spent a long time working with him, JD, Vance, and he prepared JD, Vance to be a candidate. He was the one who created JD, Vance as a candidate. And he put in, I think, $15 million. It was the largest individual contribution in U.S. history to a single candidate. A guy nobody knew, his first election, and he becomes a senator, man. The second youngest senator in history. Out of nowhere, this guy named JD shows up. Vance, where did this kid come from becoming a senator? This chubby, round-cheeked guy? Who is this guy? Peter Thiel's protege. So these guys, they follow a worldview, a technocratic worldview. You might ask, what do you mean, technocratic? Yeah, it comes from the technocratic movement back in the 1930s. In the 1930s, when first the crash of 29 happened and then the Great Depression, people started thinking, well, capitalism didn't work out. We need to come up with another model. And then the technocratic movement emerges. The technocratic movement, what do they want? They want to replace money with energy credits. This idea of carbon credits is based on that concept from the technocratic movement of the 1930s. So what's the idea? We're going to develop technology, energy will become so abundant, and goods will be so cheap that we won't need money anymore. Everything will be free. But then you run into a paradox called the Jevons paradox. The Jevons paradox says the following. If you develop a technology to the point where production becomes extremely cheap and products are practically free, let's say energy, you'll end up with infinite demand. Because if someone doesn't have to pay their electricity bill, they'll leave the lights on all day, run the air conditioning, the pool pump, everything. So you'll have to keep supplying more and more energy, and that's just not feasible. So what do? They come up with the idea of credit. The super rich will have unlimited credit, and ordinary citizens will have a monthly credit limit they can use. So that's the concept behind the technocratic movement. We won't be choosing politicians. It'll be the very best engineers, the most brilliant and creative minds who will govern, and everything will be really, really cheap. But you'll have credit. So this idea that you will own nothing, but you will be happy, comes from there, from this technocratic movement. Because Klaus Schwab is also an heir to this worldview, which he learned when he went to study in the United States at Harvard with Henry Kissinger. Kissinger also shared a bit of this worldview. So what is being implemented in the United States and in Europe with the World Economic Forum and in other countries in Latin America and Asia, which is this same vision, is exactly that. That's why your question was good. What is happening globally? How is this being implemented in the United States? The Department of Government Efficiency is installing Palantir Technologies' artificial intelligence systems from Peter Thiel on all the machines, hunting for waste wherever it exists. But with this, they're doing two things: collecting everyone's data and training their artificial intelligences with the best data available. You know, they say Elon Musk bought Twitter so he could use Twitter conversations to train XAI, right? To do machine learning. Just imagine if you have Twitter data plus the data of all American citizens. Man, you win the race for artificial intelligence because you have the best material to train the AI. And besides that, what else is happening? And the complete shift from physical to digital. The total digitalization of everything. Even the digitalization of American natural resources that Howard Lutnick is proposing. He said, man, we need to pay off these 35 trillion in debt. How are we going to do that? He said, all the minerals, all the water, and all of America's natural wealth, we're going to tokenize it. And from all of that, if we have 1%, we have 500 trillion, then we can pay it off. So this idea of tokenizing nature, of total digitalization, comes from this technocratic movement, which actually ended up becoming illegal in many countries, in the United States and in Canada, and some people were arrested because it was kind of a tyrannical thing. It was like a dictatorship of the technocrats, and the population would have to live off the crumbs of the energy credits they would hand out. And then a member of the Canadian technocratic movement named Joshua Rattleman was arrested because of this. When he got out, he didn't return to the technocratic movement's party. Instead, he joined the Social Credit Party. We're talking about the 1930s, the Social Credit Party, which had the same idea. You're not going to earn a salary, you'll get a credit. That's what the replacement of physical money with digital money is. That's it. It's not money, it's a token.
It's like Black Mirror, right? People have points, like with Uber, you as a user, right?
So that's what China uses it. So the thing is, China is the prototype, China is the test drive, because if you can implement this with 1.5 billion Chinese people, you can implement it in the West. You just need a justification, an argument.
Here we are, we're digitizing various documents. But here's the thing, do the Germans know something? Because or is it a cultural issue? Because over there, they have an aversion to several things, points that for us here in Brazil are already quite common, like digitizing documents, property deeds. You have to go to the notary office there. It's a thing. It's all on paper. They keep everything on paper. They have, I don't know if it's a matter of redundancy, of not being able to use the system. I even say, I have German friends who say, yes, it's even a matter of, some think it's cultural.
Let me give you another challenge, Manino. Do you think there were perhaps land grabbers in Germany?
Is it the same here? No, right?
So you don't need to digitize. If over there the paper is the same and it's still valid today, then it's fine. But here, why isn't it just paper? Because it stains the paper. You put a
little termite in there.
You put a little termite in there for a while. The cricket, right? The cricket. You don't even need much, really.
People, I don't know if they know how it used to be. You put the paper in the drawer and leave a cricket inside. It eats the paper gets...
You leave a bunch of crickets in there for a few days. It looks old, right? They pee, that yellow stuff. It starts to look like that too. And then you show up like, look, I have this document. That's a land grabber.
Yeah, land grabbing. Like, look, I have this really old document. No, it's a document from last week.
You really think so?
Can't find page?
Do a sweep through those big land plots in Brazil? Man, you're crazy.
Curiously, you can't find the page, the book, or write at the registry office. Yeah.
I also think, since you mentioned culture, sometimes we can't forget that Germany was a powerhouse that was coming on really strong. And some scholars say it took 2 world wars to stop Germany from becoming the global superpower, the ruler of planet Earth, right? That's how strong they were. So the Germans went through 2 or lost 2 world wars and got bombed a lot, right? Imagine the mess it was after when someone said, hey, man, this land is mine. No, it isn't. Where's the document? Man, they blew up the registry office. Sometimes that's how it is too, right?